For example, one of the things which has triggered this is the decision by OPEC to reduce production to drive up prices. Saudi says this is a technical, not a political decision. What does that actually mean in practice?
Yeah, great. So basically, the U.S. says that it's a political decision from the Saudi part, that we are actually somehow siding with Russia, which is preposterous, to be honest. And from the Saudi side, we say it's a technical decision, and it's not a decision that is made by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia alone. There are like around 22 nations that are members of OPEC+. So I actually assume that the U.S. knows it's an important technical decision more than OPEC+ itself. The proof of that is the fact that the U.S. administration urged the kingdom to postpone the production cut for a month. So basically until the end of the midterm elections. So I would put it the other way around. The U.S. criticism was political, and the OPEC+ production cut was technical. So OPEC should have, I think, a provision that is called U.S. Elections Middling Services, and I'm being sarcastic here, unfortunately. Anyhow, as we all know, OPEC+ produces more than 50% of the global oil supply, and they have more than 90% of the global proven oil reserves. All the 22 OPEC+ members decided to cut production for technical reasons and economic reasons that had nothing to do with politics, and that have been shown at the conference with some charts and proofs. The Saudi Minister of Energy, he showed a chart that was produced actually by Bloomberg, if I'm not mistaken, that shows how OPEC+ delivered real stability to the oil market. And the chart shows that oil prices increased only 6%, like from the time before the invasion of Russia to Ukraine. So, and right now it's actually less than the price right now, as we are speaking right now. It's around 88 or 89 US dollars, and it used to be 92 before the crisis. So OPEC+ actually managed to mitigate the risk of having the energy prices or the oil prices to go out of control. And the other thing that has been shown in the chart is the fact that it had shown that other energy resources like gas and coal have skyrocketed to 80%, such as gas, US gas, and 120% for coal, and etc. And so the numbers don't lie, and OPEC+ should be applauded and thanked for their efforts to regulate this essential industry rather than being criticized for doing the right thing. Another thing to mention is the fact that short-term moves hurt the sector. And I'm not an oil expert, but based on the readings I've done, and there are like indications that very low prices of oil will decrease investment in this vital sector, which will result into high volatility in the mid and long run. And the US Biden administration energy policy was a good case study for that, when the US decided to shut down, or better say, challenge the existence of their own hydrocarbon industry 2 years ago.
Yes. Now, you touched on it at the very beginning, but there has been some suggestion, particularly from the Americans, that Saudi Arabia is somehow supporting Russia at the present time. And I wonder what your reaction to that would be. And in any event, can there possibly, or could there possibly be, any long-term benefit in Saudi Arabia supporting Russia?
Okay, Nicholas, actually we can say the same thing about the EU, okay? Just 2 days ago, the European Union announced that they will still import materials for their nuclear plants from Russia. Does that mean the EU is siding with Russia? So it's the same logic. Also, the best reply to this was made by the newly appointed Saudi Defense Minister, Prince Khalid bin Salman. He tweeted and said, Iran is also a member of OPEC. So does this mean that the kingdom sided with Iran as well? And I would also add that the Iranian regime, through its Houthi proxy, has fired around 430 ballistic missiles at civilian targets in Saudi Arabia. And they also sent 851 explosive drones to harm our energy infrastructure and target civilians. Iranian drones that may actually ring some bells for the viewers. And that's all, guess what, Nicholas? Afterward, the kingdom actually didn't even give a hint to politicize OPEC. and never even entertained the idea of kicking Iran out of OPEC. And I actually call this strategic patience and real responsible leadership of the oil market and global economy. Look, Nicholas, the Saudi government was very clear. The Saudi government condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine at the United Nations, and they explicitly condemned the actions of taking lands by force. The Saudi position on that was very clear, and it was no surprise that you would see some media organizations that would just try to find a way through which they attack Saudi Arabia, but it was actually, the surprise was when it came actually from the US administration itself.
Yes. Now, I think it's fair to say that the Ukrainian President Zelensky has publicly thanked the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia for his mediation and for Saudi support for Ukraine. I was wondering, in general terms, how do the Saudis view the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, actually, just to add something, in addition to that, President Zelensky recorded himself 3 days ago, and he said that the Saudi-Ukrainian relations is now stronger than ever for the last 30 years. And Biden actually says, we at Saudi Arabia side with Russia. So it's unbelievable how Biden's advisors made him to say so. Anyhow, as I said, the kingdom voted against this invasion. But if you ask me for my own personal opinion, I'm a political analyst, an independent one, I would say it was definitely a tragedy. It was unjustifiable at all whatsoever to invade another nation. But in my own analysis, I would say it was a provoked war, mostly by the so-called liberals in the United States who wanted to fight the Russians via Ukraine and Europe. And there are actually, Nicholas, there are actually two people who almost never and ever agree on anything, Henry Kissinger and Noam Chomsky. And both gentlemen said that it was a provoked war and there must be a fast and speedy and prompt diplomatic solution. And when these two gentlemen agree on one thing, then we seriously have to pay attention.
Yes, we do. Now, some of us are in fact old enough, believe it or not, old enough to remember what I would call probably the first great oil crisis in 1973, when King Faisal, for reasons that connected with the war or the actions of Israel, restricted oil supplies to the West, which had a profound economic effect on the West at the time. And I was wondering if you see any danger of what's currently happening with oil and with the Saudi position, of that sort of conflict repeating itself, or whether, as you said earlier, what we're really seeing is a technical adjustment misunderstood by the Americans.
Yeah, I think, okay, look, the US-Saudi relations is a historic one, no doubt about that. 80 years alliance. We fought communism together. We fought terrorism together. We stabilized the global economy together. We definitely had ups and downs in the relations, but that's normal. And I'm not downgrading the challenges in this relations right now, but I'm actually personally counting on the cool-headed policymakers in both nations. But with no doubt, President Biden made some big mistakes towards the kingdom and its leadership. He said earlier that he will make Saudi Arabia a pariah. What is that? Then he talked about recalibration. Then he visited the kingdom. Then he spoke recently about re-evaluation. So from, pariah to recalibration to re-evaluation. So we don't actually know what these words mean anymore. And to be honest, and I might sound harsh, President Biden insists to be in the wrong side of history in almost all policies, whether energy policy or sticking to the failing Iran nuclear deal or the alienation of the US allies or his own handling of the US economy, which currently has the worst inflation for the last 40 years. And I personally don't want to criticize someone with the age of my grandfather, but I obviously did. But the reality of the matter is that the US simply doesn't have a president right now. That's what I want to say. And the US knows that alienating Saudi Arabia is equal to alienating the US dollar, or better say the petrodollar. And it's the last thing the Americans want to see, specifically our friends in the United States, because we have a lot of people who we can count on. And alienating Saudi Arabia is equal to alienating 1.7 billion Muslims around the world. It's the center of Islam. more than 55 Muslim nations going to be alienated by that decision.